First lecture, chapter one, for the spring semester 2022. I need to get used to, to thinking about this year being 2022. We're going to talk about why people get addicted to drugs. It's fairly common. If I can get this thing to work, there we go. Okay. I have a little congestion, so bear with me a little bit. I may be blowing my nose and taking drinks a little bit more frequently than I normally do, and maybe sneezing. The debate about drugs, at present there is a debate going on over the legalization of marijuana. I think there are 20 states that have legalized marijuana. I think it's 20 instead of 16. Arizona keeps voting and voting it down. Colorado, of course, just to your north, has legalized marijuana. It's only illegal in 6 states, which means medical marijuana is out there. It's prevalent, and there are only 6 states where you can't have marijuana at all, where there is no legalized marijuana, and I'm not exactly sure what those 6 states are. Currently, the drug seems to be causing the most serious problems is crystal meth, amphetamine, and opiates and opioids, prescription opiates and opioids. Not only are we having trouble with these drugs in North America, but it is causing crises in Europe and Asia as well. So it isn't just the United States that has a problem, it is other continents. The most serious problems in the United States at present seems to be the use of prescription drugs. This is especially a problem with teens. But they're not the biggest killers. The biggest killer among all the addictions is smoking of tobacco. And this is what clean lungs look like, and this is what tobacco tarred and nicotined lungs look like. States are increasing the limits to public smoking. Most states do not allow you to smoke in public areas. When I was back in the 70s during the Vietnam War, when I was in the military, they smoked everywhere. They smoked in buildings and whatnot. And eventually, of course, the government decided, geez, we're killing too many people. So they outlawed it in public buildings, and then now it's outlawed in public places as well. A lot more logical. A lot fewer people dying from smoking now. The use of performance-enhancing drugs in sports has been an issue since the home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa in 1999. Barry Bonds was accused of juicing. It is accepted that steroids can cause damage, but new generations of performance enhancers have hit the sports scene that do questionable damage and are undetectable through drug testing. And of course, the question is, if you die young, and several athletes have, what price glory? And of course, there's Mark McGwire with his, actually that was a milk commercial, not a steroid commercial. But Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire, 1999. You guys are way too young to remember this. Of course, this was a big deal. If you're a baseball fan, and you were around in 1999, aware of what was going on. There has been an immense growth of computer games, cell phone usage, and other online problems, especially pornography. Pornography is, of all the things happening on the internet, pornography is the most lucrative. With the increase of technology, psychologists have been behind the addiction power curve in identifying problems that people are having. And of course, we're not exactly sure where this is going. There are a lot of people that excuse someone who is a gamer or somebody that is on social media constantly. There's a lot of people that say there's no harm done, but not everybody's the same, and unfortunately, it looks like there is harm done, and so we need to deal with that. As a matter of fact, in the fall, I will be presenting a class that deals with gaming and social media usage and watching movies, and how some people it actually can cause a lot of problems for select individuals. Early man saw his world as mysterious and dangerous, and they had a basic need to cope with his environment. Early man discovered that by ingesting certain plants, they could ease their fear and anxiety, reduce pain, treat some illnesses, give them pleasure, and assist them to talk with their gods. The human brain responds to psychoactive substances. Obviously it does. When people suffer from mental illnesses or behavioral addictions, the altered state of consciousness makes the individual feel better. Psychoactive substances make the individual feel better. Otherwise, they wouldn't use them voluntarily. Governments, ruling classes, and religious entities have sought to control the supply of drugs through control of growing, control of manufacturing, control of distribution, by taxing the drugs and through prohibition. Ancient Sumerian medicine men used opium as a secret medicine. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt would dole out beer to keep their laborers building pyramids. Coca leaves were controlled and doled out by the Incan rulers in Peru to maintain the needed laborers in the country they controlled. After the Spanish conquered the Inca, they controlled the growing of coca leaves to increase tax revenues, always after a little bit of money. The American revolutionaries exported and taxed whiskey and tobacco to help finance the revolution. Technology allowed addictive substances to change, improve, and strengthen potencies over the centuries. Alcohol was first distilled to heighten the potency in Arabia in the 10th century. That's the 900s. Morphine was first refined from opium in Germany in 1804. Cocaine was first refined from coca leaves in Germany in 1859. An automatic cigarette rolling machine was invented in the United States in 1881. The stimulant amphetamine was first synthesized in Germany in 1887 to replace ephedra. It was synthesized in Japan in 1919. LSD was first synthesized in Switzerland in 1938, and there's the individual that did it. That's Professor Hoffman. Sinsemilla growing techniques were first used in the United States to increase THC levels of marijuana in the 1960s. The THC content of marijuana is 14 times stronger today than it was in the 1970s. So the people voting to legalize marijuana, the older individuals, the hippies from the 70s, 60s, and 70s, these individuals have no idea how strong this marijuana is. This is much, much stronger than anything that they ever smoked or toked or dealt with back in the 60s and 70s. 14 times stronger. The amphetamine molecule was first modified to produce designer drugs such as MDMA in the United States in 1910. Faster and more efficient methods of putting drugs into the body has intensified the effects. In 4000 BC, Sumerians mixed opium with alcohol to produce a stronger effect. It was discovered that absorptive effects of coca leaves could be intensified if the leaf was mixed with charred oyster shells in Peru in 1450. In England, in 1800, aficionados discovered that they felt giddy and high from inhaling nitrous oxide. In 1900, Europeans discovered that if they snorted cocaine, they could absorb the drug more quickly. In the United States, users discovered they could intensify the high of crack cocaine by smoking the rocks in the 1970s. Within the last decade, users have discovered that they could get a bigger rush from select time-release pain relievers, OxyContin and hydrocodone, by crushing the tablets and injecting them directly into the bloodstream. Over 4,000 plants have been identified as yielding psychoactive substances. 60 of these have been in continuous use somewhere in the world throughout history. Opium poppies, marijuana tops, coca leaves, tea leaves, betel nuts, cot leaves, coffee beans, tobacco leaves, fruits, and other plants that can be used to manufacture alcohol. Excuse me. There's evidence that select groups of Neanderthal in Europe used fly agaric mushrooms to produce hallucinogenic effects for shamanistic rituals. Those are the Neanderthals. Many of the first cultures considered alcoholic beverages, especially wine, as a gift from the gods. The Egyptians had a god of wine, and that was Osiris. The Greeks had Dionysus, and the Romans had Bacchus. These were all gods of wine. The Bible has 150 references to alcohol. Most are warning against its use. Opium has been cultivated in the civilized world for over 6,000 years. In ancient Egypt, 5,000 years ago, opium was used to treat mental illness and to quiet crying babies. Cannabis sativa has been grown as hemp for thousands of years. The plant has been used mainly for its fiber in manufacturing rope, but also for its medicinal and hallucinogenic properties. Mescal beans, peyote. The thing about marijuana is from Asia. It's Asian. It comes from China. So people that tell you, oh, it grows naturally here in the United States. Well, it does grow in the United States, but that's because it's been brought over from Europe. Initially, it was brought over from Europe. So it isn't a natural plant of North America. Mescal beans, peyote cacti, and psychedelic mushrooms have been used for their hallucinogenic properties for thousands of years, mostly used by shaman for visions. These drugs have been used in both North and South America. The psilocybin mushroom was preferred by the Aztecs and Mayan cultures. Of the 30,000 species of mushrooms in North and South America, only 80 produce the hallucinogens psilocybin and psilocin. Tobacco cultivation and use dates back 7,000 years in North America. Looking at the substance, actually, they just discovered tobacco in a cave that is 13,000 to 14,000 years old in North America. So the 7,000 is an old figure. This is just one incidence. So it was actually being used. It was found in a pipe stem. So it was being used 13,000 to 14,000 years ago. Looking at the substance from a survival point of view, its strong alkaloid properties not only made it noxious to herbivores, so it wasn't being eaten by deer or elk or buffalo, but it gave the properties that humans seek, the alkaloid properties. And it is these alkaloid properties that makes it so destructive, of course. Archaeological evidence from South America shows that coca leaves have been prized by the indigenous people there for at least 5,000 years. Evidence seems to indicate that they gave it to the dying to ease their journey into the afterlife. Other drugs used by the ancients included members of the nightshade family, Solanaceae, that's not pronounced correctly, I'm sorry, which contained the chemicals atropine and scopolamine. During the Dark Ages, people used these drugs, who used these drugs were accused of witchcraft, the medicinal qualities being ascribed to demonic possession or collusion. We won't go into that. Datura, also known as thornapple, is sometimes made into the salve and absorbed through the skin. Henbane has been used as far back as ancient Egypt, 3,500 years ago. It was used as a painkiller and a poison. In ceremonies, it was used to induce insanity, which in turn produced hallucinations that resulted in prophecies. Belladonna, beautiful woman, is also known as witch's berry and devil's herb. This drug dilates pupils, inebriates the user, and can cause hallucinations and delirium. And this is the amaryllis is belladonna, the amaryllis plant. If you've ever had amaryllis flowers in your house, we have some right now. The mandrake is also known as mandragora. The root of the plant often grows in the shape of a man and was used in ancient Greece to make prophecies. The drug causes hallucinations and delirium. In the 15th century Italy, it was used as an aphrodisiac. One of the stranger psychoactive drugs is ergot, a brownish purple fungus that causes cereal grain rust, especially on rye, but also on wheat, barley, and triticale. The active ingredient in ergot that causes the problem is lysergic acid diethylamide, also known as LSD. Outbreaks of ergot in Europe and rye growing areas have caused widespread insanity and death. One outbreak in France in 944 is reputed to have killed 40,000 people. The first written use of caffeine came with the Olmecs 3,500 years ago, who used coca or chocolate to produce a stimulating but bitter drink. Tea was cultivated 1,700 years ago in China and has been used in Eastern Asia ever since. Coffee was first cultivated about 1,200 years ago in Arabia. The Olmecs, of course, were in Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica being Central America, that area. The invasion of the Americas by the Europeans opened up new markets for psychoactive substances as the European and American people traded their addictive substances back and forth. Coffee, alcohol, and tea were brought to the Americas, and coca and tobacco were taken back to Europe, which ritualized use of the stimulants became part of each culture. Opium came back to Europe in the form of a medication known as theriac, which saw opium mixed with from 70 to 100 other medications. Eventually, in the 16th century, a stronger version of opium began to be used as a tincture of opium became quite popular. A substance known as laudanum was used for everything from a sleep inducer to a painkiller to a treatment for alcoholism. In the early 1600s, a new drink was invented in Holland. It was known as gin. Because of the contamination of the water supply of Europe, only alcoholic beverages could be drunk with impunity. This new drink was flavorful, easy to make, and inexpensive. It became the drink of choice among the poor in England. Quickly, alcoholism rates and mortality due to drinking skyrocketed in the back alleys of London. England's growing population stopped growing due to the deaths. Attempts to regulate gin production and distribution led to riots. Production rates septupled. Septupled means multiplied by 7. Finally, in 1751, new laws were passed and gin consumption returned to a less deadly level. Still, control of psychoactive drug use was sporadic throughout the world. Nitrous oxide, laughing gas, inhaling parties were not uncommon in Victorian England, though the practice sometimes resulted in more fighting than laughing. Morphine was about 10 times as potent as opium. Morphine was used during the Crimean and Civil Wars, the American Civil Wars, to treat wounded casualties. Many men became addicted to the painkiller after these wars. Opium became dangerous to life and limb with the development of morphine, but it would get worse. In 1855, the hypodermic needle was invented, making it possible to inject morphine. In 1874, morphine was synthesized into diacetylmorphine, or heroin. Heroin was and sometimes 5 times stronger than morphine. Opium became involved in one of the oddest events in the history of psychoactive substances. The British were addicted to the caffeine in tea, but the Chinese demanded silver bullion to buy it. The British had no commodity that the Chinese wanted, that the Chinese would buy with silver. The Chinese had eradicated opium smoking from their country in around 1000 AD. In 1839, the British battled the Chinese to open their ports to the opium trade. The Chinese lost the war in 1842. The Second Opium War was fought from 1856 to 1860 to open more Chinese markets for trade. The Chinese lost again. Trade went from 15 tons in 1800 to 2.5 million tons by the turn of the 20th century. The British had cheap tea and the Chinese had an addiction. And of course, many of the wealthy families of England became wealthy because of the opium trade, something that most people don't talk about. They also became wealthy because of the slave trade. Even though slavery was illegal, was made illegal in the English colonies around 1810. They still traded slaves and made lots and lots of money. Money's more important than people. In 1859, cocaine was synthesized from the coca leaf. It quickly became a new medicine. It was used as a topical anesthetic and used for eye surgery. It was mixed with wine to make a new, stronger concoction. It was used by Freud to control asthma, gastric problems, as an aphrodisiac, and to relieve depression. During the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, many patented medicines were manufactured with what would become illegal drugs. Coca-Cola was first manufactured with 5 milligrams of cocaine and continues to contain coca extract with the cocaine removed. Coca-Cola continues to be the largest purchaser of Trujillo coca leaf. Now you can't get high on Coca-Cola, but once upon a time you could. Back when they were using these bottles instead of these bottles. They changed over in the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century. But all was not paradise in the alcohol-soaked United States. Drunk and high men made poor workers and worse husbands. Inebriation impeded responsibility, and abuse among drinkers was common. The first temperance organization was started in the United States in 1826. To understand why temperance was so widely accepted in the United States, we have to understand the woman's lot in the early 19th century. Contraception was illegal in the United States, so women tended to be pregnant almost constantly. The drinking pattern in the United States followed the path of cheapest booze. Corn liquor was least expensive, so men tended to drink voluminous amounts of whiskey. We're not talking about beer here, we're talking about whiskey. Women saddled with a sporting husband were likely to raise their children in poverty and to have to accept his drunken abuse. The U.S. consumption of alcohol in 1830 was 7.1 gallons of pure ethanol for each citizen compared to 1.8 gallons today. So that is an average. And as you can see, it's 5 times higher, almost 5 times higher than it is today. And that's for every man, woman, and child in the United States. Now, the reality was that most children and women didn't drink a lot of alcohol, if they drank any at all. So most of this was going to the men. The first state to prohibit the sale of alcohol was Maine in 1851. By 1855, 1/3 of the states in the United States had laws controlling the sale and use of alcohol. By 1920, enough states, 33 out of 48, limited the use of alcohol to lead to the passage of the Volstead Act, prohibiting the manufacture or sale of alcohol. Now, there's a lot of myths about prohibition. Um, the idea of prohibition comes to us from television shows and from movies, The Untouchables and whatnot. A lot of negative things have been said about it, but the reality was that it really changed the tenor of the United States. But alcohol wasn't the first psychoactive substance regulated. In 1909, the Opium Exclusion Act was passed, banning the importation of opium into the United States for use other than medicine. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotic Act was passed, labeling opium as a narcotic to be controlled by the federal government. While the Volstead Act was repealed in 1933, other psychoactive substances have been added to the list of controlled substances in the United States. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, banning the use and cultivation of cannabis. In 1965, drug abuse control amendments regulated the manufacture of stimulants and depressants. In 1970, the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act consolidated all the drug legislation so that they would be controlled out of the same office. In 1984, the legal drinking age was raised to 21. Now, I was born in 1949, and so by 1984, I was in my 30s. I think it was. Yeah, I was in my 30s. In 1984, I was 35 years old. So I remember all of this as if it happened yesterday. Legal drinking age being raised to 21. In most states, it was already 21. There were only select states that didn't have the legal drinking age at 21. One was Ohio, and I lived in Indiana, so people would go over to Ohio to drink when they were 18, 19, 20 years old. As weird as that may seem, but Louisiana had 18 as a legal drinking age as well. Did the Volstead Act work? The answer really all depends on who is answering it. Good things that transpired from prohibition: cirrhosis of the liver and other alcohol-related diseases declined dramatically. Domestic violence fell. Violent crime actually fell by 2/3. Public drunkenness disappeared. What negative things transpired that were directly related to the Volstead Act? There was an increase in organized crime, mostly bootlegging alcohol, of course. Corruption of politicians, corruption of law enforcement personnel. Drinking eventually returned to pre-prohibition levels, but it took 20 years. And since the population markedly increased, the amount of alcohol consumed was actually lower per person. So it actually lowered the amount of alcohol that people drink. If you think about 7.1 gallons of pure ethanol per year, and when we're talking about pure alcohol, we're really saying whiskey's not pure alcohol. Whiskey's about 50% alcohol. Vodka's a little bit more than that, about 60%. So when we're talking about 7.1 gallons, we're really talking about 14 gallons of whiskey. Now, 14 gallons is a lot, especially of a drink as strong as whiskey or tequila or vodka. That's a lot of vodka. 7.1 gallons of pure ethanol. Vodka is what, 60%? So that would be about 12 gallons of vodka. And I don't know if you can drink a gallon of vodka every month. That's an awful lot. Anyway, what's wrong with pot? Hemp was grown in the United States, in the Americas, with little problem until it first began to be smoked as a mild hallucinogen in Texas in 1910, from whence it spread to the rest of the West. In the 1930s, the Hearst newspapers ran a propaganda campaign to label marijuana as a narcotic. Part of the complaint with marijuana was that it was being brought into the United States by Mexicans. So it was a way to control the illegal entry of that population. Before that, there was free movement across the border. No one cared. We needed workers in the United States, especially agricultural workers, and nobody cared that these people were coming across the border. But Hearst didn't like Mexicans, and Hearst was a newspaper publisher in the West, especially in California. He didn't like Mexicans, and he wanted the movement of immigrants across the border to be controlled. So one way he could do that was to control marijuana. By 1936, 38 states had branded marijuana as one of the most dangerous drugs. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed banning the growth of marijuana in the United States. Marijuana was used as a drug only in rural areas where it grew wild and in the back rooms of cities where it was identified with jazz musicians and beat poets. In the 1950s and 1960s, the influence of the beat poets' support of using psychoactive substances, including marijuana, as an act of rebellion, caught on with the youth of that era. And these people were called beatniks in the 1950s. They were called hippies in the 1960s. This is a picture of beat poets outside a famous bar in New York City. This is Allen Ginsberg. That's the only one I really know. This guy is Burroughs, and I can't think of his first name. But these are all beat poets, and as you can see, they're just a little bit different, a little bit strange. So the people that follow this, and you can see these in old movies, especially from the 50s, beatniks. If you ever watched the original Dobie Gillis with John Denver as Maynard G. Krebs. Maynard G. Krebs, this was a television show made in the 1960s. Maynard was a beatnik, and that's why he wore sweatshirts and a beard, and he had I can't remember what kind of a hat that he wore, but he was Dobie Gillis's buddy. He was Dobie Gillis's friend, and it was really quite interesting to watch. In the 1950s and 1960s, the influence of the beat poets supported these psychoactive substances. And then the Vietnam War started and the anti-war movement picked it up. So there was a lot of youthful rebellion going on, and marijuana usage became part of that. Amphetamines were first synthesized in 1887 in Germany. Over the years, the substance was used as an inhaler under the name benzodrine and as an appetite suppressant. During World War II, amphetamines were used to combat fatigue by both sides. They give them to their pilots. When my dad drove ammunition trucks in Indiana before he joined the Army, and they would give him. They would drive all day and all night. He would work a 40-hour shift straight. So what they did, they gave him amphetamines to take so that they could just continue to drive. He never took it because he used coffee. He drank a lot of coffee. And so he was able to stay awake because of the caffeine. So he never used the amphetamines, didn't feel like he needed them. In the 1950s and 1960s, amphetamines were used in diet pills. By 1970, it was estimated that 6 to 8% of Americans were using diet pills. That's how they stayed so slender. Amphetamines were part of the fuel of the hippie movement and the Summer of Love in 1967. Congress passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970. Why did they do that? Well, some people think that it was to try to control the anti-war movement in the United States. They wanted to arrest these people, and they didn't have any grounds to do that, so they used these laws to control the anti-war movement. Sports were pretty much the purview of the wealthy and the extremely gifted through the first half of the 20th century. It wasn't important enough to try to cheat or to gain an advantage. With the Cold War after World War II, every field where the free world met the communist world became a battlefield of sorts. The world of sports, especially the Olympics, became a very contentious area of conflict. Eastern Bloc countries, led by the example of East Germany, began giving their athletes anabolic steroids, creating super athletes. The world was appalled by the results and came out against the practice in 1968. Since then, all amateur athletic organizations have banned the use of steroids, along with the professional athletic organizations around the world. This is a young lady that set the shot putting record, as you can see. Well, you wouldn't know East Germany from West Germany, but she's East German. They gave her so much steroids that she became a male, and this is her later on as a man because of the heavy steroid use that they gave her in the when she was an athlete. Sedatives have been used since the beginning of the 20th century in the form of bromides, chloral hydrate, and paraldehyde. Barbitol was marketed as Veronal in 1903. Phenobarbital was developed in 1913. Sedatives became very popular during the Depression and World War II eras, peaking in this time period with over 50 different barbiturates dominating the market. In the 1950s, doctors realized they had not only overprescribed the drugs, but they had created a whole generation of addicted adults. In the 1950s and 1960s, a whole group of milder tranquilizers were developed to replace the more dangerous tranquilizers. Miltown and the benzodiazepines such as Librium, Valium, Xanax, Klonopin, and Halcyon became the most widely used drugs in the world. Ergot, barley rust, had created havoc wherever it appeared, and no one knew why until Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann isolated the active ingredient lysergic acid diethylamide from the fungus. After his discovery, Hofmann accidentally dosed himself and discovered the psychedelic effects of the substance. The U.S. Army and the CIA bought the rights to LSD from Hofmann and experimented with the drug through the 50s and into the 1960s. One of the researchers working with the CIA was Dr. Timothy Leary of Harvard, who decided that the psychedelic substance needed to be shared with the world. Drugs today, 1.5 billion people drink alcohol around the world. 76 million of these people have an alcohol abuse disorder, including this guy. 180 million people worldwide abuse illicit drugs. 160 million people worldwide smoke marijuana each year. It has been estimated that 20 to 60% of all hospital beds are inhabited due to drug abuse. Illicit drugs figure into the economic structures, both where they are grown and where they are used. And this is true of heroin, cocaine, marijuana, MDMA, and methamphetamines. Illegal heroin is grown in 4 areas of the world. The Golden Crescent is an area in Southwest Asia that encompasses areas of Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan. And of course, the war that we just fought was fought right in this area. The Golden Triangle encompasses parts of Southeast Asia, countries of Thailand, Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, and Laos. Mexico exports a form of heroin that is dark in color and called black tar or brown heroin. Colombia not only exports cocaine to the United States, but a white heroin as well. White heroin found in the Golden Triangle, Golden Crescent in Colombia is a purer, stronger heroin than that found in Mexico. 90% of the world's supply of illicit heroin comes from the poppy fields of Afghanistan. 60% of Afghanistan's wealth comes from opium sales, and United States efforts to curb production has resulted in an increase of by 50%. So rather than curbing it, they actually increased it. The nationalist Chinese under Chiang Kai-shek and his Kuomintang party dealt with the drug tongs of Shanghai while they controlled China. After the Kuomintang were expelled from China, they continued to grow and market opium along the Thai-Burma border in order to buy weapons for their defense against the Chinese. So we have used it. They have used it. The nationalist Chinese have used it. Have used drugs as their way of making money for a long time. The Vietnam War was a quagmire. Not only was the war being fought in the Golden Triangle, but the United States allied itself with some of the most notorious drug smugglers in the area. These were a group called the Hmong. The Hmong were excellent allies against the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong as they moved freely through Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam and fought the communist soldiers who encroached in their areas. But of course, they were also drug smugglers. Cocaine doesn't, and of course, we supported that. We supported that because we needed them as soldiers. There was also a group called a tribe called the Ho that we utilized. After the war, of course, we brought a lot of these people to the United States. There was a movie made about the Hmong. It's called Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood, and he's interacting with the Hmong in Detroit. But strangely, they moved to cold places. They moved to Detroit and they moved to Minneapolis in Minnesota. Cocaine doesn't grow just anywhere. Cocaine grows mainly in the humid mountain valleys of Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. Cocaine has been at the forefront of the political problems in Colombia for over half a century. Drug cartels operate with impunity throughout the country and control many of the decisions being made locally and nationally. I just read a book called Killing Pablo, which is about Pablo Escobar, the capture and killing of Pablo Escobar, who was a leader of one of the cartels. Used violence to control the country for a decade back in the 80s and the 90s. I can remember them talking about Pablo Escobar. Eventually, of course, he was executed, or he was killed. You could say he was executed, I guess. They hunted him down and killed him. His cartel, the Cali Medellin cartel, kind of collapsed after that, and then the Cali cartel took over. Colombia's had a lot of problems with drugs, with cocaine over the years. Worldwide, 25 million people. That is if you put Texas and Montana together, all the people in Texas and Montana equal 25 million, have died from AIDS, and another 40 million, that's the population of California plus Oregon, are infected with HIV. In the United States, around 900,000 people are infected with HIV, while 500,000, the population of Seattle, have died of AIDS. 900,000 is that's the population of Montana. When the AIDS epidemic first hit in 1982-1983, it was mostly caused by unsafe sex between homosexual males. But in time, it spread into the intravenous drug-injecting population and now is more likely to be contracted by sharing contaminated needles than any other cause. And I can remember when this was happening, I was working in medicine in 1982, 1983. I got out of the service in '83, but I immediately went in, started working in hospitals, and this was really scary because we had no idea what it was. We didn't know whether it was a virus or not. It was kind of like COVID. When COVID first hit, we were still dealing with it. We hadn't decided what was going on with it. We didn't know how to isolate it. AIDS was worse, and the reason AIDS was worse was because we didn't even know if it was a bacteria or a virus at that point. And eventually, of course, we discovered it, but it took months. And of course, we still don't have a AIDS vaccine, something that they promised us back in the 80s, but we didn't even know how to clean it. We didn't know what to do. At the time, we were when you dealt with somebody that with a patient, you didn't wear gloves. You never wore gloves. The only time you wore gloves was in surgery, and they didn't even have latex gloves. They didn't. You know, if you wanted to wear gloves, they just weren't there. There weren't enough of them. They weren't manufacturing enough, so they had to do that. They had to create latex gloves for everybody. And then, of course, people became allergic to latex, and so they had to make non-allergenic latex gloves. It was just a real mess. And of course, you needed to learn to do things with gloves on because before you did everything with your bare hands. So you were used to touching things and figuring out what was going on. And now all of a sudden you had this layer of latex between you and your patient. So it really changed things a lot. We didn't have any idea how to kill this thing. We were using Clorox, and it turned out that Clorox didn't work. We needed special cleaners to kill the AIDS virus. It was just a mess, just a real mess, especially in '84, '85. That's when I was working in the hospital. Not all areas had AIDS. It started out on the East Coast in New York City, spread to the West Coast, but the middle of the country was pretty much safe. And then '84, '85, '86, it came into the Midwest as well. Just a real terrible mess. Hepatitis C is a liver infection that infects 4 million people. That's the population of Los Angeles. 4 million Americans. 85 to 90% of all intravenous drug users are infected with HCV. That's hepatitis C virus, mostly from sharing needles. Ever since the Roaring '20s, people have been mixing the coolest of music with psychoactive drugs. In the '20s, it was jazz mixed with cocaine and bootleg liquor. The women were called flappers, and the men were referred to as jazzbos. In the 1950s, the music was the blues. The psychoactive drugs were heroin and whiskey. The men and women were either called beats or beatniks. In the 1960s and 1970s, the music became hard rock. The psychoactive drug that fueled the music were LSD, speed, marijuana, and wine. The people were hippies and the women were chicks. As we drifted into the new millennium, the music became techno or electronic trance music. The psychoactive drugs that fueled the craze were MDMA, marijuana, nitrous oxide, ketamine, GHB, and beer. The participants were referred to as ravers. Marijuana continues to create controversy. Legalized in many states for medicinal purposes, people are required to have a prescription for its use. Marijuana continues to be the most widely used illegal drug throughout much of the world, including the United States, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and South Africa. The destructive effects of tobacco have prompted many countries to try to curb its use. Cuba banned smoking in public places. Ireland has banned smoking in pubs. In many states in the United States, smoking is banned in any public area. This includes Iowa, Illinois, Arizona, and Montana. As late as 1966, almost half the population smoked regularly, 42.6%. By 2005, the percentage of regular smokers in the United States had declined to less than 1/4 of the adult population, 22.5%. This decline had much to do with the discovery that cigarettes contain many carcinogens that cause disturbing medical problems. 1,178 people die every day from the effects of smoking. A study in England showed that smoking can reduce life expectancy by 10 years. I remember when I was young, of course, I was born in 1949. So by 1966, I was a junior in high school. If you went to somebody's house, they had ashtrays all over the place because there were so many people that smoked. You gave away ashtrays for Christmas because everybody had ashtrays in their house. My parents didn't smoke. Neither my father nor my mother smoked. So we didn't have ashtrays. So when a guest came over and we needed ashtrays for this individual, they'd have to find something to use as an ashtray. But if you went to most people's houses, they had ashtrays all over the place, and usually they were full. People smoked cigarettes. By that time, of course, they were smoking. They were smoking filtered cigarettes, but during World War II, of course, they gave them away. During Vietnam, they gave them away in the sea rations, I think. Despite the reduction of revenue for tobacco companies in the United States, they have been able to keep profits up by developing foreign markets in the third world. In the United States, tobacco manufacturers have tried to sustain their market by marketing females to females, minorities, and younger smokers. In 1998, tobacco companies agreed to pay $246 billion over 25 years for their illicit practices in the past. Worldwide, 33 million people use amphetamines or similar stimulant substances. In the United States, 16,000 meth labs were raided in 2004. However, meth labs have been partially controlled by controlling their precursor chemicals, ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, found in common cold remedies. And there you go. The state with the most meth labs, my home state of Indiana. Missouri has a lot. And of course, there you go. This is 2014. Treatment for amphetamine usage has skyrocketed in the past decade. In 1993, only 21,000 people sought treatment for amphetamine addiction. This figure had increased by 151,000 by 2004. Other stimulants also make an impact on our lives. The use of caffeine in recent years has increased markedly. Coffee kiosks have sprung up in tiny towns, and sales of caffeinated soft and energy drinks have exploded. 18% of teens, 4,300,000, abused Vicodin in the form of hydrocodone in 2004. Hydrocodone is the most widely used and abused prescription opiate. 10%, 2,300,000 teens abused the opiate Percodan in the form of OxyContin, the time-released version of oxycodone. Alcohol directly kills 75,000 people in the United States every year. Alcohol directly kills 1.8 million people worldwide every year. 17.6 million Americans have alcohol abuse disorder. That is 8.5% of the adult population. Alcoholics make up 10 to 15% of people in hospitals, 10 to 20% of people in nursing homes. When MRIs were done on gamblers, the portions of the brain that were activated by winning and losing were the same areas that were activated by cocaine. Statistics show that 2.5 million Americans are classified as pathological gamblers. 3 million Americans are classified as problem gamblers. 50 million Americans are at risk for problem gambling. One study in Minnesota in 2004 found that 1% of the gamblers accounted for 50% of the wagers. In the same year, among the riverboats of Illinois, 10% of the gamblers accounted for 80% of the revenues. While gambling may be the most economically devastating behavioral addiction, there are others that are equally personally devastating. Compulsive overeating, anorexia, bulimia, internet addiction, sexual addiction, excessive TV addiction, compulsive shopping, pornography addiction. And that is the end of the chapter. So I will talk to you in a couple weeks